Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your sci-fi sommelier, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your master of fun and wonder, and your existential Mr. Rogers. Robert Meyer Burnett, Rob casting at you from this, the Robservatory, with Robservations, a show about something. Robservations, episode number 239. Oh my God, on a Sunday. Amazing. Sorry I couldn't be here yesterday. I was dealing with, of course, my duties as the manager of the Burning Droogs, the greatest team the movie Trivia Schmodown has ever seen. And if you haven't gone to the movie Trivia Schmodown and don't know what it is, you don't know what you're missing. But if you do, remember, support the Burning Droogs. We are the best team in the league. You will be witnesses. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, a couple of things. I was privy, my friend Cliff Stevenson, who some of us affectionately call Geek Santa, gave me, when I saw him on Friday, gave me a check disc of Knives Out, the upcoming Blu-ray of Knives Out. And he has created a excellent feature-length documentary on the making of Knives Out. He was on set. It is a special feature that harks back to the heyday of special features, and it was very nice to see. And I'll tell you something, I even tweeted about it yesterday, and Ryan Johnson himself tweeted back at me. So that was pretty exciting. And apparently, according to Ryan Johnson, if you buy Knives Out on iTunes, or is it called iTunes anymore? If you get it on the Apple Store, it does indeed come with the documentary bundled with the film. So that is very exciting. So congratulations to Cliff for that. I very much appreciated that. Now, also, some of you noticed that I went on Gary Beekler's Nerdrotic channel for a live chat with a number of folks on Friday night. And there is always people that say to me, why do you go on other people's channels like that? People that might have differing points of view from you or espouse different, let's just say, philosophies than I do. And my answer to that is, well, you know, I believe in trying to build bridges to all fandoms and all fans. And I like what Gary does. I mean, do I believe in everything he has to say? Not all the time. Certainly not. Am I an acolyte of the fandom menace? By no means. However, there are people that are part of that group that I have reached out to and have been on their shows, such as Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, that I caught hell for that one. But Jeremy was very nice to me and reached out and asked if I would go on a show, just like Gary Beekler did, and I consider it a privilege if other YouTubers ask me to go on their shows. And I have to say, there have been some really nice things said about me by all of those people, and they have also held me up as an example of the kind of fan to be, which I take as high praise. And as long as they are respectful to me when I'm on their channels, and I try and be respectful of them, I will continue to appear on YouTube channels. And when people ask me, I tend to go, whether they're small channels or larger channels. As long as I feel that we can have a worthwhile discussion as fans, I think it's really important that I don't limit myself to people with one point of view. One other thing, I received a personal letter from Willow Yang, which I will not read on the show, and it was a great letter, as you would expect. And she actually made some good points to me about some of the things that I was saying on Twitter. I was going back and forth. I went to bed really early last night, around 8 o'clock, and I was just tired. But of course, I get up at like 2 in the morning after I do something like that. And I was getting up and having water and reading Twitter as I'm wont to do. And I went back and forth with a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters. And I didn't mean to publicly, I wasn't calling out any particular group of people, and certainly not millennials. I was expressing I don't have a disdain for Bernie Sanders at all. And as a matter of fact, I agree with pretty much everything that he wants to do. I think a lot of his ideas are tremendous. However, what concerns me is a lack of, I guess, policy in terms of how is he going to implement these ideas. And for instance, you have people like Elizabeth Warren, when she talks about her healthcare plan, she put her healthcare plan out there. And a lot of people, I think, had sticker shock with what she had come up with, but at least it was a plan. And I was saying basically that I would rather see, how are you going to go to Washington? Anybody, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, anybody who's going to go to Washington and affect change has to be able to build coalitions and work within the system, as broken as it might be. And my only concern when it comes to someone like Bernie Sanders, who on paper I absolutely agree with, is how are these policies going to be enacted? How are you going to work within the system to try and build those coalitions and work with people? And that's pretty much my point of view. But I really do appreciate that, again, an audience member on this show, in this case Willow Yang, obviously somebody that we cherish here on the Burnettwork. And certainly if you want to read any of her letters, they're on the Burnettwork.net website under Willow Talk. And I would welcome anyone, if you want to take me to task and you don't want to do it publicly, please send me a letter. I'm happy to interact with you on that level. I don't care if you think I'm a complete and utter douchebag. If you want to write in and tell me that, I would expect that you should do so in a creative and well-written way. But I welcome any and all commentary. If you think I've said something wrong, I do not fear that kind of criticism. As a matter of fact, I am absolutely open to it, and I would rather hear from you. I don't need people just to blow smoke up my ass. You can, although, that can be pleasurable, but I expect, I want to hear honesty. As I say, I'm not just, when I say everyone has a story to tell, all you have to do is listen. I don't think necessarily all those stories are going to be pleasurable to listen to, or that people aren't going to be certainly tell you stories that might offend your delicate sensibilities, because they will. So I just wanted you all to know that whatever you want to say to me, just make sure that if you want to write me directly and you don't want me to share it on the air, please state at the top of your letter that. Just say, Rob, I would appreciate this, or if you don't read this on the air, or something to that effect. So anyway, just wanted to say those things. And again, I want to thank Willow Yang for reaching out and writing a tremendous letter to me, actually, and I completely understand where you're coming from, and I don't disagree, and I must be, I think, clearer in the future. A lot of people have asked, why don't I get more overtly political on this channel? But I think, like a great Star Trek episode, I think I am political. I'm just trying to do it in the guise of talking about entertainment. And what you imagination connoisseurs and members of the Post-Geek Singularity, have to say. And maybe I'll get more political as we get closer to the elections. I did get my primary ballot for California. I'm very excited about that. Look forward to voting in the primary. I think it's always fun. But on another note, today in the Hollywood Reporter, in their Heat Vision section, they published a really interesting article that I thought I should share with you because it's right up our alley. And as everyone knows, Sonic the Hedgehog is a hit. Sonic the Hedgehog did very well this weekend. It was, I think it exceeded expectations. And as many people know, that when the first Sonic trailer came out, fans of the game and people that were looking forward to this movie were very vocal about their displeasure about the design of Sonic the Hedgehog himself. And they were very vocal on all forms of social media. And the producers of the film and Paramount, the company distributing the film, thank God Paramount had a hit. Congratulations to Paramount. But they actually listened to people and redesigned Sonic. And I thought that was, wow, I mean, that was a real example of how public displeasure, fan displeasure, had the desired result. And we saw change. So fans actually were effective at changing something. And I want to share this article with you right now. Sonic and the Costs of Fan Anger by Richard Newby. Paramount's decision to redesign the character paid off, but how much should audiences have to say on the creative process? Sonic the Hedgehog is currently speeding through theaters, but his road to get there wasn't without a few speed bumps. In fact, there was a time when we could have been watching a very different looking Sonic run across our screens. While one day it will all be a piece of movie trivia, there are a few now who can forget the first trailer for Sonic the Hedgehog. There are few now who can forget the first trailer for Sonic the Hedgehog and the controversy that ensued. It was the spring of 2019, and the internet was still abuzz over the adorableness of Detective Pikachu. Then came the Sonic trailer. There had been rumors, of course, reactions from cinema conventions. We first saw Sonic, John and I, at CinemaCon in Vegas in April. There had been rumors, of course, reactions from cinema conventions, silhouettes of theater standees, and leaked images that some swore, even prayed, were fan-made. But it was all real, and to see it in motion was something else. The first trailer for Sonic wasn't just a trip to the uncanny valley, it took us all the way down into the uncanny cavern. The response from fans and non-fans was immediate and loud, and Paramount, fearing its would-be franchise would be dead before arrival, pushed the release date and had the VFX team redesign Sonic with an appearance far closer to that of the Sega game. That's the power of the internet, the power of fandom, but where do we draw the line between artistic vision and fan approval? And what's the cost of either side winning? The case of Sonic seems relatively clear-cut, and with all due respect to the VFX artists involved, the comparison between the original gangly-legged Sonic with a mouthful of teeth and the current version reveals a clear winner. The intention behind the original design isn't lost on us. That model does look less cartoony and more akin to something biological and able to believably appear alongside human characters. But that doesn't mean that it's good-looking, a good-looking design, or that there isn't something eerie about it. Still, good decision or not, it was the decision of director Jeff Fowler, and if we're going to fight for creative freedom in studio movies, then maybe we have to fight for the ugly bits too. There's certainly a case to be made that the side of the coin, having seen the film, wherever Fowler went wrong with that original design, which may have worked better as concept art than as an animated entity, he certainly got it right with other aspects of the film. The movie is a good family film with a lot of heart, strong performances, and innovative action sequences, something that would have remained true regardless of how Sonic looked. But there's a chance that a significant amount of the audience who will show up this weekend would not have had shown up had the original design been kept. When it comes to an IP, one that already has limited niche appeal like video game adaptations that the studio hopes to broaden, there's something to be said about winning fan reception. There are plenty of properties that can use, even thrive on, significant changes, regardless of the initial opinion from fandom. Take Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, or even the less critically acclaimed, but financially viable, Transformers series, at least in its earlier days, for example. For all the complaints about the grounded nature of Nolan's Batman world and initial skepticism over Heath Ledger's casting of the Joker, these elements not only won fans and non-fans alike, but became accepted foundations within the medium and the mythology of Batman. And Bay's Transformers didn't resemble the G1 models of the action figures and cartoons that many had grown up with, but they still found their own global fan base and hooked a new generation who hadn't been there for their popularity in the 1980s. When Bumblebee attempted to revitalize the property and utilize the G1 models, the film didn't find the audience it deserved, showing that sometimes giving the fans what they want doesn't mean the fans will show up. I would say that the Transformers franchise actually did that to Bumblebee itself. The last night Transformers film, the Michael Bay Transformers movie, I think damaged the brand. It had nothing to do with going back to the G1 designs. And Bumblebee is actually quite a lovely film, by the way. This is always the gamble when giving into fan service in a climate where a number of online voices doesn't equate to the number of ticket sales. With long-running series and properties that have been adapted numerous times, it's a lot easier to take gambles and tick off the fan base. Sometimes it pays off, like the casting of Daniel Craig as a blonde James Bond, a controversy that seems absurd nearly 20 years later. Sometimes it doesn't, like the 5 attempts across film and television to follow James Cameron's T2 Judgment Day, And sometimes we're left in a never-ending war of arguments for and against. Such is the case with Zack Snyder's Man of Steel and Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Personally, taking gambles with these properties is something worth fighting for. After all, there's no artistic reward in doing what's already been done before, and in simply making films for immediate adoration. The notion of making a movie simply to appeal to a fan base is an empty win and ultimately feels pointless because fandom is such an incredibly fickle and nebulous thing. Fan demands are not without their repercussions either. Franchises and careers have lived and died according to the word of mouth of fans, sometimes fairly and sometimes not. It feels impossible to talk about Sonic the Hedgehog without commenting on the fact that the visual effects company, moving picture company that did much of the VFX work for the Sonic currently seen in theaters, shut down its Vancouver office in December, leaving many artists who worked on the redesign unemployed. It's unknown if the closure was related to Sonic or the result of other circumstances. Still, VFX artists are often blamed for decisions and design choices that were not on them. And after the Cats segment during last Sunday's Oscars, a number of those artists are starting to push back against being used as scapegoats. The changes made to Sonic resulted in what is a more visually appealing movie, and there are many VFX artists we can thank for that. But it's dangerous to think of the fan reception to the original design and the studio's quick response to change that design as something that should be normalized. Sonic feels like a special case and perhaps a lesson to filmmakers looking to expand the audience of niche properties. But we shouldn't expect studios to be held for ransom by fans and for them to cater to our demands, because ultimately filmmaking isn't a medium that can rely on a quick patch or a democratic conversation between developers and fans like video games. When we go to the movies, we take the risk of seeing something that may not fit within our expectations as fans, and we may leave surprised or disappointed, but ultimately, that's what makes the game worth playing. Well, I thought that article was pretty interesting, and what do I think about it? What do I think about... Look, do I wish other franchises would listen to fans a little bit more? Certainly. But here's the thing. I don't always think I've been a fan my entire life. Literally my entire life. I mean, I've talked to you people about how I was watching Star Trek when I was 5. War of the Worlds was my favorite movie when I was 5 years old. And I have been a fan of all this material. And it wasn't until... What I find really interesting is growing up, it wasn't even until I moved to California about 30 years ago, which I for college, which I've talked to people a lot. I've talked a lot on this channel how John Parkan, my roommate at the time, set up a Star Trek BBS board. And this was in '88, long before there was an internet. And I found other people to talk to about Star Trek. Now, before then, my experience with fans was either when I went to conventions. That's why I went to conventions, to talk to fans. Or you'd read letters of comment in the back of comic books, which is, believe it or not, when I would buy comics, and for about 30 years of my life, I went every week and bought comic books. And my first destination in each one of those books was the letters of comment. You turn to the back, and there was always a letters page. And there's even people like Frank Balkin, a guy, I think I've met him once, but I've conversed with him a couple times. I recognized his name in the back from comic books. And then when I came and started working in the industry, I started seeing his name appear, and it was like, my God, those letters of comment were absolutely real, and they came from fans. And I thought it was always interesting to see what fans wanted. And I know that certain comic creators over the years have talked about being influenced by fans and what they had written in and suggestions people have made. Now, I don't necessarily think that fans are always the best arbiter of what's good and bad with a property. Certainly, when it comes to certain casting choices, whether it was Michael Keaton or whether it was, of course, Heath Ledger famously, if you listen to the initial fan thoughts about these things, and if filmmakers took them to heart, they might not have even made these movies. They might have walked away in disgust. And I think what's really interesting is that we would have been robbed. Can you imagine a world without Heath Ledger's performance in The Dark Knight? I certainly can't. And anybody who ever saw Lords of Dogtown and saw Heath Ledger's performance as the legendary Skip Engblom, after seeing that performance, I'm like, that dude can do no wrong. And I think it really comes down to sometimes you like I think that I always give creators the benefit of the doubt unless they have a track record that you can go back and look at and be like, I don't know if these creators are the right people for the jobs. And of course, look, in Hollywood, there are contracts drawn up, and when things are going into production, fan backlash is really going to have no bearing on what gets made. However, what I find interesting about the Sonic case is the fan backlash. I mean, most people were, I know I was laughing at the fact. I'm thinking Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog, isn't that like 20 years too late? But of course, now you have a whole generation of people that grew up playing Sonic, and now everyone's probably pretty much an adult. And it was interesting to watch that reaction, because when I was sitting at CinemaCon in the Paramount presentation, I was watching this thing and I'm like, even I played Sonic the Hedgehog, but I was not some diehard Sonic fan. But even when I was watching the film, and it just didn't seem like my kind of movie, it was with Jim Carrey's doing a very Ace Ventura-esque over-the-top Jim Carrey performance. But even I was bothered by the look of Sonic. I was sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, it's not so much about the uncanny valley, and I've all the way back to movies like, heck, Mary Poppins or Song of the South, when you have human beings interacting with animated characters. Who Framed Roger Rabbit being obviously the greatest example. That's never really bothered me, but in this case, even I was looking at that trailer going, it doesn't work. Like, it just, for whatever reason, it didn't work, because it was sort of going the Roger Rabbit direction and sort of not. And even I was like, this design of this character just doesn't seem to work very well. And even I could see that. Now, I wasn't somebody that was going to vociferously express my discontent online. I didn't mind, but I did find the ensuing controversy when the trailer was released to the public really interesting. And the fact that, Paramount, obviously, they're hurting enough. Their output has been, I want to see Paramount come back. Jim Giannopoulos is trying to turn that studio around. I'd really like to see Paramount. I'd love that mountaintop to once again have the luster on it that it had, let's say, in the 80s, when you had movies coming out from Paramount like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom and Last Crusade and Beverly Hills Cop. And in 1990, we had Hunt for Red October. Paramount there was a lot of good stuff. 48 Hours. I think they had a great time in the 80s and the 90s even still. But the last decade has not been kind to Paramount. They've been struggling, and they keep trying hard. They have basically David Ellison's company Skydance to co-finance a lot of their movies. And, even then, the last Jack Ryan movie with Chris Pine, really, it disappointed. So I want Paramount to succeed, and after Terminator Dark Fate, that didn't work so well. I'm really hoping Top Gun Maverick, which looks to be outstanding, will be a monster hit. But I did find it interesting that they stepped in and they acted quickly. And luckily, the film, John Campea said, I have not seen Sonic, but John Campea did go see it, and he was just talking about on our show Friday just how bad the visual effects in the film were. The compositing wasn't good. Now, I don't know if that was a function of how long it took to fix and how much money they threw at it, but again, I am happy that redesign apparently helped fans out. It allowed fans to embrace the film, and the movie has done quite well at the box office. I think it's a record-setting performance, according to industry sources, and I think it's great. But should fans have a say? And let's talk about the elephant in the room. There's obviously Star Wars and Star Trek. Should fans be allowed to have various, any input? One of the people that pioneered that as a creator was Ron Moore. Ron Moore back in the 90s would go on to, say, AOL, which had a lot of Star Trek boards on it, comment boards. He would go on those boards and interact with fans. and would listen to them. And he famously did the same with Battlestar Galactica, and he had a lot of fan interaction because obviously the fan base of these shows is your core audience. And the thinking is in Hollywood that the fans are going to show up anyway, which is true, but it's also the fans that are going to go back again and again and again. So it really is those core fans that are going to make what you've done. It's going to take it up to a notch in terms of a level of success. Now, it's absolutely true when you are making a motion picture, whether it's Transformers or whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars, you also have to appeal to everybody, not just the fan base. That's how it works. That's how it has to be. And I understand that. And I totally agree with it. Now, people will say, well, Rob, you're constantly on social media and on this show bitching and complaining about Star Trek. Should creators listen to you? And I would say that my feelings about this are more in general terms. Like I'm looking for better writing overall. I don't necessarily, when I talk about when I'm critical of these shows myself, there's a lot of shows on TV that I enjoy, whether it's Netflix's Sex Education or Ozark or things that have been on, well, Better Call Saul and of course Breaking Bad. I've enjoyed shows like The Sopranos and The Wire and Breaking Bad, and I'm interested in good writing that makes sense. And my real objections are when we see the franchises, I think, not taken as seriously by the creative teams. I think that there is an obligation to anybody who's coming on board and taking over a franchise that they have a certain working knowledge of where that franchise has come from and that they chart a course where they'd like it to go in the future. And it needs to be something that's really considered. If you're going to take over a franchise, whether it's Doctor Who, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's Star Trek, there's homework that needs to be done when these franchises are taken over. And I really believe that it's very important that the creators, the custodians of these franchises, do that homework. And there are choices that I've felt that are sort of inexplicable to me. For instance, off the top of my head, I found the experience of watching Star Trek Into Darkness baffling because you have a character in the guise of Benedict Cumberbatch's Khan, and you never at all refer to his backstory in any meaningful way that can help you understand where that character was coming from or what his abilities or what his desires or what his wants were. I mean, that film has the most convoluted, strange amalgamation of plot elements from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and moving forward. None of it makes a lick of sense. And watching it, hey, it looks beautiful. It's certainly well made. But from a writing standpoint, none of it particularly holds together well. And I'm baffled by that. And clearly, and Alex Kurtzman being one of the writers of that film, I think that's how does that happen? With everything I know about how films are made, even Tango Shalom, there are sequences that we lifted out of the movie during post-production that we had to account for and make sure that the story still worked, taking out these, and spoiler alert, they do. Nobody will ever miss the sequences we took out of the movie. But all movies are like that. All movies are iterative, and I don't necessarily think we did screen. It was interesting because we screened, in my own case, Tango Shalom about a year ago, and I listened to some commentary from friends of mine that are very trusted, which is why they saw the movie a year ago. People I trust very much with their opinions. But even they were making comments that I agreed with, but they were comments that should have, or been, if they were going to be addressed, they would have been addressed at the screenwriting stage, not with dealing with what you already have on screen. Because once you've shot a movie, you're limited in terms of how much you can change it. Luckily, in the case of Sonic, they were able to go back in because Sonic is an entirely CG character, so it wasn't cheap. but they went in and apparently they made the right decision listening to fans. I ultimately believe that fans should not necessarily have a place in the creative process because I think that filmmakers and artists, writers, directors, they can take fan criticism or fan suggestions under advisement, but at some point you have to let the creative teams do what they do, which is why it's very important when the powers that be who are in charge of hiring these people, they hire the people that are the best people for the job. And that's kind of a crapshoot. But you need to make sure, look, in Hollywood, people, you take any job. Really, you don't, there are very few people that have an option in Hollywood or in the entertainment business to be able to say, I don't know if I'm going to take that job. Usually you're forced to take the jobs that are offered to you because they don't always come. And when they do come, it's a gift. It's definitely a gift. But anyway, I'm sort of torn on this issue because I do think that creators should be allowed to do what it is they do best, which is create. And hopefully you're going to get creators like Christopher Nolan who are going to make decisions and think out of the box, because you have to trust that a filmmaker with Nolan's background knows what he's doing. And when even when he made The Dark Knight, he had Following, he had Memento, he had Insomnia, he had films that he had made that, and the Batman Begins even. I think he made The Prestige. He made The Prestige before he made The Dark Knight. But I think he had a track record where you just gotta trust the man. You have to trust the man. So, and look what we got. Look what Heath Ledger's casting led to. I mean, that was a breakout performance. That was a great combination of an actor and a director collaborating to give us an entirely new take on a character. And can you imagine if somebody listened to the fans back in the day and said, we better not hire Heath Ledger? We would have been robbed of what cinema does best, which is provide us with a great synergistic relationship between a director and an artist, in this case actor Heath Ledger, to create something totally new, to take a character that had been around for decades, who we'd seen in many different incarnations, and give us something that becomes, timeless. One for the ages. People will be looking back at Heath Ledger's performance for decades to come, hopefully. And I think everybody will agree that wouldn't it have been a shame if somebody listened to fan backlash and didn't allow that to happen? Because a lot of the times fans have a knee-jerk reaction. And I believe that if you've got a creator and you've got a team of people that are working together, that you can admire their past work and say, okay, you got to let them do what they're going to do. And in the case of Sonic, however, fan input turned out to work. But even I could see at the time, and as not a fan of Sonic, I could see that what they had done didn't work. And it's interesting. Sometimes creators, they might not know best. But I think for the most part, you've got to let creators, you got to err on the side of the creator, at least we as fans do, until they put stuff out that becomes disappointing, then complain to your heart's content. I know that I do. And I wouldn't want to be, hypocritical about all that. What do you guys have to say? Let's see what you have to say today. First of all, let me throw on my glasses here so I can see. Let's go back and Paul Gilmore sent in a tip that I didn't read. I drooled over the Matt Reeves test footage he released for the new Batman. I heard that the bat symbol on his suit is made from the gun that killed his parents. If that's true, I'm even more excited. Well, Paul, I have heard that. For those of you who, unless you're living under a rock, of course, Matt Reeves did drop a first look at Robert Pattinson in the bat suit. I looked at it and I didn't have a particular, it looked cool to me. And I think, yes, in fact, apparently in the movie, a young Batman, because the movie deals with Batman just starting out in his career, but then again, so did Batman Begins, using the gun that killed his parents, and he's fashioned it, he's melted it down and used it as part of the bat insignia on his chest. I kind of like that idea. I find that idea to be interesting. We'll have to see how it works. I thought, again, as a first look, I'm like, that's cool. It's a different take on the bat suit. I'm going to reserve judgment until I see it in the film, but certainly it definitely was intriguing. So what's not to love about that? Magic Case sent in a tip and said, the Sunday Times headline, coronavirus, James Bond cancels Beijing tour because this is no time to die. What a great headline in the year. Magic K is correct. That was a headline in London papers where the press junket for No Time to Die, where China, of course, China's box office is a big factor in the worldwide success of the Bond franchise. The James Bond, the last couple of Bond movies have done extremely well overseas, and losing the Chinese market, which is now in the grips of a coronavirus outbreak where over 1,000 people apparently have died now, is terrible. So they did, in fact, cancel that. Now, as everyone knows, I talked a lot about wanting to go to England to go see No Time to Die at the Leicester Square Odeon Cinema. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, mostly because of work-related issues than anything else. But I still haven't counted it out. I'd still love to do it, just like I did with Skyfall. But there's some really interesting stuff that I can't tell you about yet. That's percolating, and we'll see where that goes. Willow sent in a tip and said, have you watched The Sound of Music yet? It's one of my mom's favorite movies as a child. She recently found it on Disney Plus and has watched it at least 7 times now. Her assessment, the lead actress, Julie Andrews, is both beautiful and talented. Has your mom watched Mary Poppins yet? Has she seen Mary Poppins? Or better yet, show her the movie S.O.B., Blake Edwards' S.O.B., which is a movie about making movies. I wonder what she would think about that. Timbula the Spider Monkey sent in a tip. I took my girlfriend and her nephew to see Sonic. Not great, but pretty good, with a big caveat. If you were already a fan of the Sonic character. My girlfriend hated it. Her nephew loved it so much that when we got home, he immediately got out my Genesis Mini. I love it. Yeah, I'm sure it's not for everyone. You never know. But I think that's great. I love that multi-generations of people are going to see it. Always a good thing. It sounds like you have a budding movie fan in the making, if he isn't already. So I think that's great. By the way, what Willow was saying, Julie Andrews is both beautiful and talented. She's a stunningly beautiful woman. And she is even today, believe it or not. Timbula the Spider Monkey also sent in another tip. I asked John, but you weren't there. Are there any franchises you consider yourself a fan of, but you don't actually like many of the movies? For me, it's Hellraiser. I love 1 and 2. The rest is pure trash, but I'd say I love the franchise, or Pinhead, I guess. You know what? I'm right there with you. I love the Hellraiser franchise, but I'll go further. I'll say I like Hellraiser 3, directed by Anthony Hickox, even though it's kind of a hot mess. I love the whole idea. And then, of course, they went... The funny thing is, the Hellraiser franchise demands a certain highbrow level of writing. And unfortunately, when you start making direct-to-video output and things like that, and I've had friends who've worked on, even directed Hellraiser movies, and I want them all to be good, but I think the highbrow nature of the Cenobites themselves and what they're dealing with doesn't exactly lend itself to low-budget horror filmmaking, unfortunately. But as for me, is there a franchise I consider myself a fan of, but don't like many of the movies? I don't know. Maybe I would say Halloween. You know, I really liked Halloween 1 and 2, and I love Halloween 3, but it's not, obviously it's the outlier. But, you know, I tried a lot of the Halloween movies, and I really didn't like, I know everyone loved the last Halloween. I really didn't like the last Halloween. Really didn't like it. Halloween was the very first piece of physical media I ever owned. My parents bought me the video cassette when I was 13 as part of my bar mitzvah present, and I probably seen the original Halloween 100 times at least. And I love the Halloween franchise. I just don't love a lot of the movies in it, which is unfortunate. Mark Chure sent in a super chat saying, special effects were fine. The movie was a fun time. My son and I supported the movie because the studio listened to the fans. Well, that's good. See, I mean, there's a reason to support something right then and there. I mean, if they did, that's as good a reason as any to go see a film. If the studio is supporting the fan base, I think yes. I think that's isn't that a good thing? Isn't that admirable? Sorry, I'm pouring myself some more water out of my bottle of water. I always go fill it up with filtered water before the show. Stub McShave sent in a tip saying, the fan base are the returning viewers, as you've said. They're also the ones who will help or hinder marketing because the fan bases are vocal and express their views. The fan base can create a narrative on the film that transmits to the general audience as well. Look, I agree. And now that we live in a world where you can go on social media and you can interact with your favorite creators, the fan base, the whole fan thing is very different than it used to be. And I think that's a great thing about this day and age. And I do think that fan voices should in fact be heard, because we are the people that we buy the merchandise, we buy the physical media, we download the digital downloads, and there's a lot that we do about those things. And it's the fans that come back to these properties again and again, year after year, and make them what they are. So I think you're right. But then again, you know, I also think fans can love shows in ways that are necessarily, they're counterproductive to actually making those shows. You know, a lot of the time, I think about shipping characters. A lot of the time, that maybe is not the best thing to do. And I understand that where those impulses come from, but I don't necessarily think that we should always listen to what fans want. Sometimes it's better to not do that. But for the most part, I think fans should be obviously taken into consideration. Richard sent in a tip saying, the Richard, I'm a little apprehensive about Seven of Nine's upcoming betrayal in Picard. I don't believe that's Picard on screen, and I feel they're not going to do Seven's character well. For example, why change her accent to generic American? I don't buy that it would change over time. That's interesting. Well, I think, you know, as she becomes more comfortable. Remember, on Voyager, she's only 3 years into being a reclaimed Borg drone. So now we've got over, you know, a decade, was it 14 years or even longer, that she's actually been a human being. So maybe she's acclimated. She's snapped back to being Annika. She's more the human that she's more human now. And now that she's interacted with all different kinds of human beings, I can see why. But yeah, we'll see. I don't have a lot of faith that Picard, we've seen, there's 6 episodes left. We're going to be at the halfway point this week. And that trailer for the next episode did not leave me with a lot of hope. Anyway, we'll see. Swag Props. Oh, by the way, our man Cal over at Swag Props, he did post on his Facebook page, check it out, how he did a Grail diary, Henry Jones's Grail diary for someone in Italy. I think it was in Italy. And they made a really cool case for the Grail diary. And Swag Props, Cal put it on his page. Very, very cool. The man does incredible work. Everyone should check out Swag Props' Etsy store. And if you ever wanted to get a fan of something, a unusual gift, he specializes in making prop replicas of books from movies. As many people, longtime viewers, will remember, he's sent me both a book he made, The Nine Gates of the Kingdom of Heaven, that was in Roman Polanski's The Ninth Gate, and also Rorschach's Diary, which is an amalgamation of the Rorschach character from the comics and the movies. The man does incredible work, so check that out. Swag Props says, hi Rob, a suggestion for a chat guest, Mark Sakri. He has a YouTube channel called Mr. Sci-Fi, and like you, he finds the writing on New Trek disappointing. Yeah, I've watched his videos. I've known Mark Sakri for a very long time. As many people know, I've talked about it again on this channel. He recently wrote a book with Guillermo del Toro about Guillermo del Toro's house, where he has all of his beautiful artifacts and things. But Mark Sakri wrote one of the books that I think is my most, of all the books I own in my life, he wrote The Twilight Zone Companion. that I think came out in 1982. If you're a Twilight Zone fan, Mark Zakri's Twilight Zone Companion is one of the most essential reference books you can ever own. Not only did he synopsize every episode, but he interviewed all these people that were involved with the creation of the episodes. And if you think back, I mean, everybody from Robert Redford was on a Twilight Zone episode. The list goes on and on. Telly Savalas, Who Loves You Baby. And his book, if you like the Twilight Zone, his book, and he's updated it many times, but the Twilight Zone Companion by Mark Zakri is definitely something to watch. I should have him on the show. He also crowdfunded Star Command, or Space Command, and that Star Command's Jason of Star Command, but Space Command, check that out if you haven't. And yeah, I reckon a live discussion between the two of you on the state of Trek would be one for the history books. Yeah, Mark Zakri is definitely a Roddenberry acolyte, and I think it would be great to have him on the show. I think that's a great idea. Leslie Shell sent in a very generous super chat. Thank you, Leslie. There is more than one vision of what a show is really about. Take the X-Files. There were the shippers, the no Romos. I like that. Slashers, Jenners, Mulder, Krychek, Mulder, Skinner. They tried winking to all, but made a mess of the show. You know what? I agree with you. I think, Leslie, you're absolutely right. I love the X-Files, but when the first movie came out, I have to say that the show was forever tarnished. And the X-Files is a great example of, to me, it's the first impossible premise show. And I still love a lot of the X-Files. It's a beautifully made show. I love a lot of the Monster of the Week. Diane Diverlets. I mean, there's so many episodes of X-Files I love. And I was really following the mythology. And I thought that the creators knew what they were doing. Until you realized, especially in the X-Files the first movie, that they didn't know what they were doing. And then it got Noel Rohrer and the whole super soldier business. It went off the rails. And basically what was really interesting to me about X-Files, one of the things that I really was disappointed by how it let me down, was there's this thinking all throughout the beginning of the X-Files, especially I thought the first 4 seasons of X-Files are all pretty excellent. I mean, the first season took a little while. I mean, we didn't really deal with, they were sort of building up to this mythology and they were adding to it, but it wasn't really until the Erlenmeyer Flask that we really got into mythology, real mythology. And then by the second season, we were off to the races. But one of the things that X-Files never really figured out, when I say impossible premise, this idea that there was the group of the human conspirators were somehow in cahoots or in contact with the aliens, and the show never really figured out, where were these aliens? Okay, they had a giant spaceship buried in the Arctic, but it's like, okay, but where were they? Like, and when were they meeting with them? Were they having clandestine meetings? I mean, you kind of saw that they were, and then there was an alien bounty hunter that was hired to do work. I mean, where was he? Apparently there's this great cosmic civilization or multiple civilizations that are out there, and they would kind of allude to these things, but they never figured it out. And unfortunately the X-Files suffered from that. Stubble and I bum me out, but yeah, I think you're right about that, Leslie. I think X-Files might have been the first show that was actually damaged by the fans, and it was also damaged by the fact that the creators had wrote themselves into a corner that they really didn't know. I mean, there's even a track on the X-Files movie soundtrack where the entire conspiracy is laid bare, and even that, there was so many questions, they really didn't figure it out. And moving forward after the X-Files movie, it didn't really work. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, the creators shouldn't be reactive to vocal fans, but they should be aware of what the fan base thinks on a given property. They shouldn't do exactly what the fan base wants, but they should know what the fans can accept. I agree with that. You know, I mean, I think that we're lucky that we have shows like The Expanse that have the book series to deal with, so they're staying pretty close to the books. So it seems fulfilling. But yeah, I think that there's a reason why people watch a show. And I think ultimately it's people want shows to be well written and planned out, plotted. You want to know that the author of whatever it is, or authors, the showrunners of whatever it is that you love, know what they're doing. You want to feel that they know, like the Impossible Premise show, Manifest. They came up with this premise, and I don't think the writers or even the showrunner, the creator, knows where it was supposed to go. They're like, well, we'll figure it out. I still watch Manifest because to me it's a great exercise in learning how not to write a show. But yet the cast, I think, is great. I really like the actors on the show, but boy, they just are doing everything they can to move away from their impossible premise, which I think is very, very funny. And I'll stay, but I think you're right, Stubble. I think you have to take into consideration what they're doing. You have to, what fans want, what the fans are enjoying, and what because they're sort of a barometer more than anything else. They kind of point you in the direction of where you should be headed or where you could be going. But again, fans also love it when you pull the rug out from under them, as long as the rug is pulled out from under them in a way that is palatable to the fan base. So, yeah, I mean, I love it. Can you imagine if during Star Trek The Next Generation there was vocal fans who were like, you can't do that to Captain Picard, you can't turn him into a Borg? And look how that turned out. It was fantastic. I only wish Best of Both Worlds Part 2 was better, but hey, still. Echo Base Network sent in a $4.99 super chat. RMB, have you had the chance to see the documentary yet? The intro was 100% your idea based on your advice. So thoughts on it overall? Echo Base Network, I am sorry to say I have not yet seen your documentary. I've watched some of it, but I wouldn't say that I've watched it all the way through. So what Echo Base is talking about, the Echo Base Network has done a documentary on the Disney Star Wars sequel trilogy. And it started out very promising. And they use a lot of clips of YouTubers and interview clips of the creators discussing it. And it's very interesting. And I think what I loved about what you guys did was here was completely a group of fans that went out and they made this documentary. They put the effort forward and they did something. They made something that didn't exist before. So kudos to you guys. I just haven't. As soon as I finish what I'm working on now with Gabe, the director of Tango Shalom, I'll have more free time. But until then, I'm working on 2 projects that are taking up all my time. Alexander Wilson sent in a tip. Hello, Alexander. How are you? You said millennials want people to do stuff for them is untrue because according to Wells Fargo, millennials have more money in retirement and save more than Gen X with student loans, stagnant wages, and lost disposable income. Get your gen together. I stand by that. I mean, it seems strange to me. I have not read that Wells Fargo say that millennials have more money in retirement and save more than Gen X with student loans, stagnant wages, and lost disposable income. I would have to look on that. I don't know how true that is, but if it is, I'm certainly willing to say that. I still stand by my assessment. I mean, I live with, I guess one last millennial girl, but the people I know, I'm not really impressed yet. We'll see what they do moving forward. But I don't want to pillory an entire generation of people. That doesn't seem fair. They don't deserve that. But who knows? We'll see where it goes. Got some letters here for you. This letter, a Valentine's Day letter, comes from Jet Screamer. Jet Screamer writes, "It bothers me when people call you all racist, sexist, etc. just because you're honest in your criticism. I've been around all of you for a long time. No one has been these things in front of me. In fact, you have all been very kind and encouraging. Most of you know my story of abuse and mental illness from Twitter. You have accepted me into the fold, prompted me to tell my story, to improve my writing and learning. There have been current Trek fans I feel have been very cold and intolerant. I won't go on. That's not my purpose. My purpose is to speak well of you all at a time when those look to cancel you, and also to express my gratitude. I love your show, Jet Screamer, aka Mark. Well, Mark, I want to thank you for saying that. I don't know. I would hope that no one here has been branded a sexist or racist. I don't really get that. The imagination connoisseurs here that make up the Post-Geek Singularity community have, for the most part, been a pretty great bunch of people. And I love the community we've built here, and interacting with people both on and off this show. I mean, meeting people like Roberto Suarez up in Portland. What a great time we had. What a great guy. Roberto and I clearly park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. And I, like you, I found this community to be incredibly welcoming. And as I talked about at the top of the hour, or the top of this show, it was great to have someone like Willow Yang write in a really wonderful letter expressing her concerns to me in her very cogent, learned way. And I'm all about that. And I think it's great that we have this kind of a community, and I wouldn't give it up for anything. This next letter comes from Joel Summers, and it's about a very different experience he had watching The Lighthouse. If you haven't seen The Lighthouse, there's some spoilers in this letter. Hi, Rob. I love the recent discussion on Robert Eggers and his two movies, The Witch and The Lighthouse. I wanted to relate my experience of seeing The Lighthouse with two friends and the especially lively discussion we had after the movie's jaw-dropping final scene. I believe our three reactions are probably a metaphor for the reception of this movie writ large. One of us hated the movie. Another was grappling with how he felt about it. Meanwhile, I loved it and wanted to see it again immediately. We spent at least as much time talking through the movie as the length of the movie itself, and although many points were mentioned, it seemed to me that the crux of disputed interpretation came down to one thing. Was the movie about a normal world in which people go mad, or was the movie about a supernatural world that can drive people mad? Wow, I love this. Of the three of us, only I believe the movie depicted a supernatural milieu, and I found this fascinating. It was clear to me that the end of the movie was expressly about the thing that dwelled at the top of the lighthouse, taking the measure of Robert Pattinson and finally rejecting him. I thought this was underscored by the final image, which likened itself to the Greek myth of Prometheus, who was destined to be consumed over and over by a raptor. I'm interested to hear your thoughts and the thoughts of your viewers. Thanks for keeping the show fresh and fun. What a Joel S. What a great letter, Joel. Well, as many people might know, yes, indeed, The Lighthouse was based partially on a myth, on a Greek myth. I don't want to say which one or what. You've definitely laid something out here. But I think The Lighthouse is one of those. First of all, I love this interpretation that you have. But I might have to disagree with you there. That's a really, first of all, your interpretation, I think, is absolutely probably very valid. And I don't disagree with you. I actually love this interpretation that you've presented here. I saw it more as the film did drive two men to madness. I didn't see it as a supernatural milieu, but now after hearing your reasoning behind it, I'm like, yeah, that tracks as well. I mean, one of the things that I just didn't see it that way, even though I know it was based on myth. And I love this idea. And I think one of the great things about Robert Eggers, and by the way, your interpretation also fits in with the end. It would seem more like the end of The Witch is kind of the same thing. I guess that's why this didn't occur to me overtly when I first saw the movie. It wasn't until later that I read about how it was in fact based on a myth. And I like your interpretation a lot, and I think it definitely fits in with what Robert Eggers was doing in The Witch. So I would not say that you are wrong. I love this idea. And I think it's more than that. I love the fact that you and your friends had this difference of opinion about what was going on in the movie. Look, I think this movie is not... It's not exactly the most fun experience. It's a challenging experience. Just like I thought The Witch was challenging, although I thought The Witch as a movie was even less challenging than Lighthouse was, mainly because of all the... I mean, it's Robert Eggers clearly likes historical horror, and I like what he's doing. I like his obsessions. I love it when filmmakers have like Cronenberg with his body horror obsession and Hitchcock with his obsessions with women and things like that, and then suspense, and obviously. But Robert Eggers has clear obsessions about history and the supernatural, and I think it's great. I can't wait to see what he does next. But what a great letter. I love this. I think it's awesome. This is an interesting letter too. Manuel Shaper writes a follow-up to his earlier letter on the female gaze and how female sexuality is portrayed in art with a deep dive. Here you go. This is you're gonna love this. Dear Rob, greetings to the Robservatory from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. This is my follow-up letter to that recent one where I discussed the issue of visual pleasure, the portrayal of female bodies in popular cinema, and the visual regimen of the male gaze as a central element in Hollywood movies, exemplified in the James Bond film Die Another Day. I was very happy to see you read the letter on the show and also to hear Willow Yang's thoughts in response to it in another episode recently. The made-up Han Solo scene with him reimagined as a character designed for the female gaze had me laughing. In this letter, I'd like to talk a little bit about the results of my study that used Laura Mulvey's concept of to be looked at-ness. I love that concept, by the way, to be looked at-ness. To find out more about the representation of male bodies as erotic objects. I can already see Vesna, Paula, and Willow going, ooh, here it comes. As I said, I wrote my master's thesis on this, and the analysis was based on a German porn magazine for straight women, not a movie or a TV show. I think this is still interesting and topical for Robservations, but we'll keep it short. I don't want to bore anyone with the details of eroticized male naked bodies. Oh, I don't think you will. Try reading the rest of the letter aloud without giggling. I take no credit for this theoretical roller coaster ride and will name drop the smart people who came up with it. I had introduced Laura Mulvey's concept of to be looked at-ness earlier, a state of erotic contemplation, shown in slow motion via the typically male protagonist's eyes. For male bodies, this seems to work a little differently, and I want to outline here some theoretical background as to why that is the case. When we talk pornography, or just sexuality in general, psychoanalytic theory suggests that there are different ways to appropriate the object of desire, and that there is a male and female way of achieving this. In analogy to the physical carnal way of sexual appropriation, we may assume that the male gaze takes possession of its desired object through visual penetration, which reflects probably 90% of all porn content. This also implicitly tells you who it is designed for, and thus can help explain why most women reportedly have little to no interest in it. It is showing penetration. It is designed for a penetrating gaze and is focused on the female's natural orifices and phallus. Now here's the thing. Heteronormatively speaking, the female body is not designed to sexually penetrate a male body. I'd like to think it depends who you're with. Scholars have argued that the female equivalent of sexually appropriating the male body in objectifying and controlling it is via fellatio. But oral sex is a risky thing in that it might result in being sullied or violated, since it also means being penetrated at the same time. Kenneth McKinnon called that uneasy pleasure. McKinnon wrote a book with that title, and if you or Willow Yang or anybody else is interested in the topic, I highly recommend reading it. If we take into account the idea that oral consumption is the female pendant to penetration, then the ways male and female bodies are set up as sex objects should in fact be different. If we follow this line of thought, we may assume that male bodies are to be presented in ways that suggest not only a minimized risk of being violated sexually, but also that they are fit for oral consumption, i.e., they have the same or similar properties as good, fresh, nice, and clean food. Yes, food. So in short, the male gaze seeks to penetrate, the female gaze seeks to lick or eat in a metaphorical sense, and the ways bodies are portrayed for those respective gazes varies to meet that preference. It may sound absurd, but it is interesting when we think about how often we use words related to oral consumption and taste with sexual innuendo like tasty, yum yum, or sugar. I think this whole idea can be criticized on different levels and maybe too generalizing, but I think a major strength of it is that, first of all, it acknowledges the reality of female sexual desire and visual pleasure. What I do take credit for is finding strong indication that this stuff is very accurate for the material I had analyzed. The magazine showed naked male bodies without focus on their genitals exclusively. The person's name or pseudonyms and occupations were shown, and most of the time they were photographed in their own apartments, which made everything more personal and comfortable. Many of them were presented as nice, calm, and approachable people in private scenarios. Not sweaty and hyper-masculine, hairy macho-type characters dressed up as cops or firefighters for excitement and kink, more like the average cool guy next door or someone you spot on a university campus. The whole setup, from camera perspective to locations and actions, served to portray them as harmless most of the time. There was hardly any action except for some masturbation, notably without any bodily fluid shown. Other activities had a direct inherent connection to food. For example, when they were preparing food or feeding the observer by holding food in the direction of the camera. Cleanliness was a big thing too, because when you want to lick or eat something, it should always be nice and fresh and clean. Often the models were bathing or showering, which emphasized this aspect even further. Interestingly, this corresponds with the cliche of female obsession with hygiene too, but I'd like to add here that this is probably more the flip side of a very common carelessness amongst men. Let's be realistic, guys. This image series of the models, all amateurs by the way, were never arranged to form a narrative structure, which supported the state of erotic contemplation even more, in my opinion. When there is no coherent narrative structure of the moment apparent in the sequence of images, like in a comic book, there's no way to tell how much time is passing or if time is passing at all, like in a dream, suggesting that the pleasure of the moment never ends. I promise to keep it short, so I stop here, and I won't go into detail any further, even though I could. It's probably okay, but I've been demonetized. I conclude this letter with an outlook. One can always argue that such examples are actually more about what the creators believe the female gaze desires, but then again, we could make that same argument for female bodies in Hollywood movies or porn. I personally do not think that everything is in fact that easy, and that human psychology, sexuality, and desire are probably less clear-cut and binary, and the ways they flow into works of art and popular culture are probably more complex than that. But nonetheless, this is an interesting approach, an approach that is using idealized concepts but puts some things into perspective for us when we think about the ways we look at others and the ways we're looked at by them. Best regards, Manuel Shaper. By the way, we remember Burt Reynolds' legendary nude photo shoot in Cosmopolitan from 1972? I recommend checking that out. It is another interesting historical attempt to show a male body as an erotic object for the female gaze. It is true. By the way, this letter is on the Burnettwork website with that picture of Burt Reynolds. So check this out. I think what's interesting now, now that everybody has access to porn whenever they watch it, I feel, or whenever they want to see it, I feel that that eroticism is being lost. I miss erotic movies. And when I say erotic, I don't mean X-rated films. I mean eroticism, how eroticism can bring people together. Movies like Body Heat. And I think the erotic impulse is something that it's weird. It's a part of popular culture now, but it seems like it immediately jumps to the extreme all the time, because now that you can go to, I don't know, Pornhub, RedTube, whatever, we have pornography that's so accessible, but you're watching it, it becomes so mechanical. And I hope that eroticism, we don't lose what eroticism means. I mean, there's something about the promise of all of that. And I love movies where erotic power, both male and female, becomes part of the narrative, and how erotic desire can become all consuming. And I've always liked that. I've always liked the power of that, and when it's expressed in movies in an interesting way. And I really haven't seen many movies lately that have real eroticism in them. And that's one of the things. I mean, a lot of Blue Is the Warmest Color was criticized because it was made by a man, and obviously there's a number of very explicit same-sex scenes in the film that are quite erotic. But I when I saw the movie, I thought it really underscored that movie to me. Blue Is the Warmest Color was so shattering because it was so raw in terms of its emotion, and I really felt I really felt the characters, especially our main characters, Adele's her anguish, and the pain of she had such this she had never had an erotically fulfilling relationship before until she met Léa Seydoux' character, and then she tried to move away from that, and it added to the pain of that whole tragic romance, and I think we're really, as a society, we're missing something. I mean, it seems like, especially when it comes to eroticism as portrayed in popular culture, either we're seeing it in these fantasy contexts, but we're not. That's why I think Sex Education, this series, is such a good series. I mean, it has a really matter-of-fact but humorous approach to sexuality, and it was kind of refreshing. But I want to thank you for these letters. Obviously, I don't get many letters like this, and to be looked at Ness is still one of the most interesting things anyone has brought up in any of the letters here. Now, this is an interesting letter to speak about to be looked at Ness. This comes from Sam O'Neill. Greetings, Rob, and all the Post-Geek Singularity crew. I'm not sure if you remember, but my last letter was about how and why there is toxic fandom about 2 months ago. Anyway, I've had this thought in my head for a while now, and I just didn't know how to put it into words until Aaron brought it up on John's show on Friday. I'm a 23-year-old electrician from Australia, and I've always been just slightly fitter than your average Joe. You definitely can't tell my geek fandom for all Marvel, Star Wars, and DC movies looking at me. Iron Man kicked off my love of comic book movies. I was 12 when it came out, and I've loved all comic book movies ever since. Seeing Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, Henry Cavill, and all the other actors that got into serious shape made me want to get into superhero shape a few years ago. I'm by no means there yet, but I'm well on my way. I've also noticed a lot more people, men and women, doing the same. It got me thinking. Do you think these movies set up an unrealistic body image that men, I can only speak for myself, I'm sure women feel it as well, try to live up to, with the wide, thick back and showing bolder shoulders and so on? As Aaron said on Friday, you're either Chris Pratt dad bod or Chris Pratt ripped. There's no in between. Thank you and have a better day. P.S. Listening to you and John over the past year has made me venture out and watch movies that I would never really watch because they don't look like my type of movie, so I thank you both for that. That comes from Sam O'Neill. Well, Sam, what an interesting question, and it sort of harks back to the idea of to be looked at Ness. I think you're absolutely right. I think more and more fit people getting fit, when you have more and more examples of how people look, and superhero movies definitely should have had, I mean, you've seen it yourself. I can absolutely see that. I mean, we live in Los Angeles, and there's a lot of gyms and people going to gyms because actors and things, you want to look good. I've always believed that one of the getting fit is, I about 10 years ago, I worked out with a trainer, and I started out where I weighed about what I do now, about 240 to 250. And I got back down within 5 pounds of one being 195 pounds, which is what I weighed in high school. And it took me about a year and a half, and I was working out 4 days a week and very diligently was watching my alcohol intake and everything. And it was, first of all, you just look better. You look more, I would say, artistic. Your jaw is more chiseled. Your body works better. And I think that there's no doubt. I think people are, in fact, I think our bodies are machinery. So if our machinery is being utilized in such a way that it's being optimized for performance, obviously, I think looking at superhero movies, it's just, look, I felt better. Everything about my life in terms of my physical life was better. I feel pretty good now, though. For a middle-aged guy, I don't really have any aches and pains, knock on wood. And I'm certainly, the problem is, if you want to look like you're in that shape, it's a job. It is a constant, it's a constant effort that you have to make. I think it benefits you in the long run. I mean, obviously, you're watching your food intake. I think it's also, unfortunately, as you probably know, the people in superhero movies are in unrealistically good shape. They're working with the very best trainers money can buy, and it's a job for them. They're being paid as part of their salaries to do that and look that way. However, I think there is a happy medium. There is a happy medium. Like myself, I'm not working out. I'm not watching my food intake, but I probably should start doing that. Like I do want to get into better shape. I'd love to drop 30 pounds. I mean, I know I just look better. My face looks better. I don't have a chin. I have great cheekbones, if I do say so myself. So I look better when I lose weight, all around. And, I think anybody can do that. The problem is there's only one thing keeping people from doing this, and it's absolutely a combination of nutrition. You have to eat well. You have to design your meals, and you have to work out. You can't just diet. Because what you have to do is when you're kickstarting your metabolism, your body is actually overall functioning different. And it's great. I think it's great. Once you get past the initial like 3 months of drudgery and you cut back on the food, and you can even drink liquor. Like I love alcohol. I love it. But I've really cut back on my alcohol intake. And I really don't drink at home at all. And then I might have, if there's a beer left over, I'll even have a beer when I do this show. But, it's work. It's work. I mean, you can still have things like if you drink vodka with soda water or something, you can still drink alcohol and work out, but you have to watch it. It's a job, man. You have to function. And as you know, getting into superhero shape is unrealistic. You cannot sustain that. I mean, I guess you could, but who would want to? But I think there's a happy medium. I think there's a difference between, you could get fit, but you don't have to be in superhero shape. But I guess it really is up to what you want more than anything else. Simon sent in a generous tip. Thank you, Simon. Let me cut back to this. Going back to this. Simon says, "Hey RMB, I admire your perspective about the Trek universe, but I still need to understand how you were able to analyze the storylines, character arcs, and verisimilitude between Star Trek the original series to '09 Abrams to Disco Picard." What a great question that is. I think, first of all, here's a little bit. I'll give you a little bit. This is a really good question. I'll give you a little bit of insight into how I look upon these things. First of all, a lot of people would when you're watching something that's made in the 1960s with the technology of the day, and one of the things about Star Trek that people forget is one of the reasons Star Trek, the original series, looks the way it does with color coordinated. You've got gold for command, blue for sciences, and red for support services. That's why red shirts, the whole idea of red shirts, well, he's wearing a red shirt. Uh-oh, he's in trouble. Yes, security was part of support, but so was engineering. And by the way, if you really look at how many people perish in Star Trek episodes, there are episodes like The Apple where many, many characters die. Many red shirts die, one right after the other. The Man Trap, things like that. But for the most part, it doesn't really. That is a false. That red shirts always die is sort of false. There's many Star Trek tropes that are false. But so how you're asking me, like, if I'm watching the original series, in my mind, I take into consideration the fact of when Star Trek was made. They wanted to sell color TVs. So the colored gels and the lighting scheme and all the colored uniforms and even the sets being as colorful as they were a conscious effort by the network to drive color television sales, as many shows were that transitioned to color TV in the 60s, in the early to late 60s. And so when I take into consideration Star Trek, like, for instance, if you had the exact same sets as the original series, the exact same uniforms, and everything looked exactly the same as it does, if you changed up the lighting, you could make Star Trek from the 60s look like a contemporary show. Not entirely. I mean, you might have to use a little bit more set decoration and a little bit more detail. But that's why it makes my teeth rattle and my gums bleed when people say, what, you want Star Trek to look like it did in the 60s? No, I'm not saying that at all. But from my own experience, even in fan films, when I've shot things on sets. Depends how you light things. You can do a lot of Star Trek did not have handheld photography. You know, you take a camera off and you start shooting handheld, it changes everything up. And it's really interesting. Like you look at even our short Skyfighter that just dropped on the Dust Network. Shameless plug. Lucas Kendall's Skyfighter was completely shot handheld, which I think added to the verisimilitude of what was going on. So when you're talking about how and moving forward up to the Next Generation, like one of the things about the first season of Next Generation, to me, it looks like a show that was made even it predates the original series. It's sort of so stilted and weird and stage bound and all of that, but that was because of by design. And I don't have a problem because my mind is like, okay, Star Trek it started in the 60s. So at the time, the way they were doing visual effects with blue screens, that doesn't bother me because I take into account when something was made. And I add that into my idea of, that's why a lot of people go, oh, come on, Rob, look at the original series, looked how it looked the way it looked. And I'm like, yes, but Star Trek, the original Star Trek is not our future. It's a period piece about a future that doesn't exist. And there's this thought that it's our future. So I never felt that way, even as a little kid. And as Star Trek moved forward, I'm like, okay, as things like Star Trek the Motion Picture, when things became more expensive, the physical production, the look of a show was never something that I allowed to seep into my analysis of Star Trek. You know, I never did that. I would allow for the fact that, yes, Star Trek was made from 66 to 69, so it was going to look a certain way. And when the motion picture came on the scene in 1979 and you had an incredible budget and everything was different, I didn't necessarily allow that to hamper my enjoyment. I'm like, okay, this is an interesting moving forward the universe. So I've always allowed for the time in which Star Trek is made as sort of a way of moving away from verisimilitude. I've never allowed that to get in the way. But when I look at Star Trek Discovery, there's absolutely no attempt made by the showrunners, a show that relies so heavily on Star Trek history that it looks nothing like where it's coming from. And you could have made it look, you can absolutely have the same designs. You can update them, detail them. You can even change the fabric of the costumes and make them look different and honor what's going on. And this idea that, nope, it's a visual update, a visual reboot. People have even said that, you know, in the beginning of the Star Trek the Motion Picture novelization, there's talk of how Star Trek actually really existed as a show and that they portrayed Kirk's exploits differently than they actually happened. But I can't, it's very difficult for me to reconcile a universe that I've been watching my whole life for the most part, and people throw out that universe and use this I don't know what, and say that they're doing these visual reboots of this stuff, when I'm like, you don't really necessarily have to do visual reboots. You can design certainly those sets and make them look more realistic, but I think the designs held up. They just choose to do something different because there's some weird prejudice about the fact that, oh, well, these designs are 50 years old, so we shouldn't use them anymore. I think that's silly. But anyway. Simon says, oh, my question may have been broad regarding character arcs in the Star Trek universe. So to be specific, I guess I should have read this question right away. To be specific, I'm specifically speaking about the main characters, Kirk, Picard, Burnham. Can the new Trek be corrected and evolve? Oh. Well, I think one of the problems with modern Star Trek is, again, they're putting their agenda before their characters and the universe. You know, there's these guys, the Popcast. Actually, let me see if I can find. The Popcast guys did a really interesting video, which I don't totally agree with, but I did watch it. Let's see. Yeah, Popcast. Crazy Brothers reviews. They did if you guys haven't seen the Popcast podcast, here it is. I'm going to put this, and they did a video that dropped. Oh, it dropped on Saturday or on Friday. Here's a really good video. that I think addresses this issue about old versus new Trek. It's pretty spot on, and it's not necessarily as insightful as I wanted it to be, but it's pretty good. So I just put that in the live chat. But I think one of the problems that, for me, a great story, the story that you're telling, should inherently address the issues that you want to address. And it doesn't have to be, look, Star Trek was sometimes very overt about it, like in the original series, third season episode, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, which they talk about in this podcast video. But for the most part, if you're going to deal with issues or you want to impart your views about something in a Star Trek episode, you tell us a story where those views are inherently baked into whatever you're trying to do. I think, while I understand, for instance, there's a lot of politicking going on in modern Star Trek, and I think it's really overt, and I think it sometimes gets in the way of the storytelling. I think what I want to see more of in Star Trek is more real storytelling that makes sense, that's carefully considered. I feel every one of the episodes of Discovery or Picard that we've watched, that we've seen, it has a push-pull from the writing standpoint. It's as if we're seeing like 5 different writers are having to inject things into these episodes, and I feel none of them are absolutely true to themselves. For instance, we saw a beheading in this last episode of Star Trek, and I'm like, even I'm a gorehound. I love seeing bloodletting, but I watch this and I'm like, was this necessary? I mean, was any of this necessary? Is this what Star Trek is about? If I was 5 years old watching Star Trek for the first time and it was Picard and I saw somebody get beheaded, I mean, it shocked me that that kind of thing would happen. I understand what they're trying to do, but to me that was unnecessary, and I'm not an old fuddy-duddy. Maybe I am, but I'd like to think that I'm not. But I thought it was, I was taken aback by this. I was waiting for some kind of philosophical thing. I mean, just because our Romulan character has bonded himself to Picard, does that give him license to cut the heads off of anybody that's threatening Picard? I'm like, what is that? I really found that. I'm like, well, why is that allowed? And I know Picard was horrified by it, but still, I would rather have learned more about this guy. He was a Romulan senator. He's clearly not somebody. He's a character that, again, Star Trek doesn't have villains. It has antagonists. And that guy, I would like to have seen something different than watching a character get beheaded. I didn't find that to be very Star Trekian at all. And maybe Picard and him could have come to some kind of an agreement or some kind of a philosophical understanding of one another. Maybe the Romulans said, you know what, maybe I misjudged you. I mean, you think about the time the Romulans are introduced in Balance of Terror, and at the end when Mark Leonard says, in another reality, I could have called you friend. Well, certainly not in modern Star Trek. Let's just behead a guy. And a guy that had, obviously, grievances that were not out of line. I don't know. That really answered your question. But Richard sends in another tip and says, I just wanted to add, I've been a fan of yours without knowing it for a long time. I saw your movie Free Enterprise. I also completely reversed my opinion about Berman and Braga after seeing a film you shot of them being candid about Enterprise. Yes, well, I very much appreciate that. Thank you, Richard, for tipping. And for those of you who might not know, Roger Lay Jr. and I, we didn't just do the Blu-rays for Star Trek The Next Generation. We did Blu-ray documentaries also for Enterprise, for the 4 seasons of Enterprise. And one of the things we did that I thought was fascinating was based on something that Dave Parker and I had done. And, for the Valley Girl disc, back in 2003, we had an In Conversation piece where we had Martha Coolidge and Nicolas Cage just sit down and talk to each other about the film. And I had suggested we bring that format over to the work we were doing on Star Trek. And we did that. And the first piece that we did that on was we had Rick Berman and Brandon Braga sit down. We shot this at Rick Berman's house, where they too just talked to each other about the series, and it was really interesting hearing their perspective. And they're aware of fan criticisms of themselves, and it was really interesting watching that. And if you're a fan of Enterprise, I mean, it's not that expensive. If you still collect physical media, and you like Star Trek, I do recommend picking up the Next Generation box set and the Enterprise box set, if for no other reason than the episodes look fantastic, but you can watch our special features and specifically hear from the creators about the show. So I appreciate that you saying that, Richard, very much so. Ian Samuels, we talked about Blake 7. I was talking about Blake 7 the other day, and Ian Samuels, our man Ian, he also, for those of you who don't know, Ian Samuels from the UK writes an ongoing column on the website called Who Views, where he reviews Doctor Who episodes, both old and new. So take a look at Ian Samuels' Who Views on the Burnettwork. Here is Ian Samuels about Blake 7. Rob, after discovering all episodes of Blake 7 on YouTube, I have now finished watching the first series. For those of you who don't know, Blake 7 was a very ambitious 4-season science fiction series that aired in the late 70s. I don't think it went into the 80s. Maybe it did. I'm not sure the actual dates of Blake 7, but now I want to look. I'll find out right now. But it's a really great show. And let's see, Blake 7, 4 13-episode series were broadcast on BBC One between 1978 and 1981. It was created by Terry Nation, who also created the Daleks for the television series Doctor Who. And there you go. Blake 7 was popular from its first broadcast, watched by approximately 10 million people in the UK and shown in 25 other countries. Although many tropes of space opera are present, such as spaceships, robots, galactic empires, and aliens, its budget was inadequate for its interstellar theme. Critical responses have been varied. Some reviewers praise the series for its dystopian themes, strong characterization, ambiguous morality, and pessimistic tone, as well as displaying an enormous sense of fun, but others have criticized its production values, dialogue, and perceived lack of originality, with broadcaster and critic Clive James describing it as classically awful. I disagree with that, but let me get back to Ian's letter. Some people, those with a lack of faith in classic science fiction, could complain about the props and effects. But this was 1970s BBC series budget, and with those budget limitations and limitations on the effects available at the time, they did a great job. I agree. Blake 7 has one of my favorite spaceships of any science fiction show, the Liberator, in it. The characters are engaging and their stories compelling. Their leader, Raj Blake, a true leader who managed to take a band of criminals and reprobates and turn them into a ship crew and a team willing to go out of their way for each other. A true rebel leader on par with Mon Mothma or Princess Leia. Jenna Stannis, more than just eye candy. She is strong and strong-willed and intelligent, all the while being great eye candy. Kerr Avon, the incredibly intelligent and egotistical computer expert who continues to claim that his only goal is greed and feeding his greed with riches, but due to Blake's influence, even he proves he's willing to go out of his way for the rest of the crew. Villa Restal, the nervous thief, able to crack any lock given appropriate motivation. Ola Gon, the great beast who has a limiter put in his brain after killing a guard who had killed his wife. Gon is now unable to kill due to the implants, but is the true definition of friendly giant. Callie, a low-level telepath able to project her thoughts into another's mind. Then we get the protagonists, members of the Federation, a Federation very unlike the one in Star Trek. This Federation is more like a despotic dictatorship. First, we meet Space Commander Travis, who had previously met Blake, having given the order that killed Blake's friends and followers. He had been shot and left for dead by Blake. A surgeon was able to repair much of him using synthetic parts, so he is almost a cyborg. Then, of course, we have the true villain of the piece, Servalon. More eye candy, but eye candy who is devilishly intelligent. Servalon's one of my favorite TV sci-fi villains, by the way. The world in which we are thrust is a dark vision of the future. Blake is a damaged man. He is considered one of the most dangerous men in the Federation as he had attempted to lead a rebellion. More citizens on more planets are trying to leave the Federation than ever before, and the Federation's response is brutally officious. Blake is put through a process where his mind is torn apart and new memories are put in their place. With help, Blake begins to break through the memory blocks. So, as he is becoming a danger again, so the Federation invent crimes that Blake is convicted for and is being transported to a prison colony in deep space. Blake escapes with Avon, Gan, Villa, and Jenna on an alien ship, which has the final character to add to the crew, the ship's computer, Zen. The series was created and much of the episodes brilliantly written by previous Doctor Who writer and Dalek creator Terry Nation. It is a well-written, excellently paced, enthralling trip through space with great characters, and so I will add my suggestion to yours and urge fellow members of the Post-Geek Singularity who, like me, have not seen Blake 7 to check it out. That comes from Ian Samuels. And as Ian points out, all episodes of Blake's 7 are available on YouTube. I also have the 4 seasons on DVD I got them from Amazon in the UK. This next letter comes from Aaron Johnson. Dear Rob, I thought I would write my thoughts on The Frisco Kid, a Western comedy. I saw the film recently and I love the film. It's a fun comedy. Gene Wilder and Harrison Ford are a legitimately good comedy pairing in this movie. My favorite part is when Harrison Ford's character Tommy gets mad at the bank robbers who stole money from Gene Wilder's character Avram and then recovers the money during the latter half of the movie. What made it quite intriguing for me is how Tommy realizes that given all of his heroic actions to help Avram, he acts more like a best friend to him and is invited to be a best man at Avram's wedding at the end of the movie. What are your thoughts on this film? Aaron Johnson. Aaron, I used to like The Frisco Kid when I was a kid. I haven't seen it in ages, but yes, a young Harrison Ford and Gene Wilder did make a great pairing. To be honest, I'd have to go back and watch it. It's been 30 years, 40 years since I've seen The Frisco Kid. I only saw it once. But I definitely will check it out again. It's one of those things that I do want to catch up with, which I think is good. Timbula the Spider Monkey sent in a tip and says, it speaks volumes that I, a lifelong Trek fan who mindlessly buys anything with the Trek logo on it and owns all previous iterations on physical media, not only didn't watch the last episode of Picard as soon as it was up, but days later I still haven't. Well, I think, I hate to say it, but Picard should be appointment television. With everything they've got in it, Borg, 7 of 9, Bruce Maddox. It's not like they're not doing deep dives into Trek lore. But, I hope they got Brian Brophy, it's Brian Brophy, right? The actor who played Bruce Maddox. If we do find him, I really hope that, Brian Brophy, he's still around. I really hope. Well, let's look on his IMDb page. Is Brian Brophy, his last credited acting appearance was in Black Friday, a short in 2014. He isn't even listed. He has a lot of credits. Wow, his first credit was in an episode of Max Headroom. He was obviously in Star Trek The Next Generation. He was on the Larry Sanders Show. He was in WKRP in Cincinnati. Of course, he was the head of the parole board in the Shawshank Redemption, one of the parole boards. And wow, I hope they bring him back, because if they don't, he's not listed here. What a missed opportunity that is, to not have Brian Brophy come back and play the character he originated. That half this series, you know what? That's gonna piss people off. If they don't have Brian Brophy come back and play Bruce Maddox. He is now, by the way, wow, this is interesting. Brian Brophy is now the head of theater arts at Caltech. How interesting. Well, there you go. Brian Brophy. He's the head of theater arts at Caltech. Let's hope he's on there. I hope they get him back. But yeah, I just think Picard, with all the elements in place and the amount of money they have to spend, it should be far better than it is. We're now this next episode, we're halfway through the season. They're still putting together the team. Dancing Dogs sent in a tip, Dancing Dogs 60, and said, Robert, I'm wondering why a Vampirella television show has not been developed for a streaming service. To me, the series would be perfect for one of the many streaming services. Your thoughts, my friend? Well, Vampirella is a character that was created in the pages of, what is it? It was Creepy and Eerie magazines. I think it was, right? I think so. Now, I think a Vampirella show would be great. What's not to love about that? Now, let me show you something that I think. Vampirella is 50th, just celebrated its 50th anniversary, and let me show you this figure. Well, if I can put it in here. You got to see this because they just came out with a Vampirella action figure. And this Vampirella action figure, when you see it, you'll understand. I mean, even I might be embarrassed to buy it. But here is, I'm putting it in the live chat. Here's a link to the Big Bag Toy Store and their Vampirella figure. Who wouldn't want this? It might be a little weird, but, oh, you can see it. I didn't realize that I had that up there. Well, there you go. It's in the live chat. I didn't mean to do that, but hey, look. You get it. You can look at it now. Sorry about that. But anyway, yes, I think a Vampirella show could be great. And let me see if Vampirella, now that you had to watch that, let's see what Vampirella is credited as. Okay, yes, Forrest Ackerman did create Vampirella. Vampirella is a fictional character, a comic book vampire superheroine created by Forrest J. Ackerman and comic book artist Trina Robbins in Warren Publishing's black and white horror comics magazine Vampirella 1 in 1969. Writer-editor Archie Goodwin later developed the character from horror story hostesses, in which capacity she remained through issue number 8, into a horror drama character. And that's from Warren Publishing. That's where it's from, Warren Publishing. So, yes, you can get that Vampirella action figure. I want it, to be honest. I want to get it and put it here on the Robservatory. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to an end of Robservations episode number 339. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank all of you imagination connoisseurs, all of you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. I want to thank everybody who generously supports the channel, and both here and on the website. Please, if you want to read or have me read your letters, go to the Burnettwork.net right down there and send me letters. And if you don't want me to read them and you want to take me to task for anything I've said on Twitter or said anywhere, please do so and just tell me that you don't want me to read the letter on the air, but I will, in fact, read your letters. I want to thank you all for being here. I especially want to thank my esteemed moderating staff, beginning with the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden of Riverdale, Iowa. I want to thank, of course, Detective Jim Boyers, who knows if you've been bad or good. Remember, he's a cop and detective, so watch out. Retired, of course. And Greg Smith, who is working still on his 1-to-1 scale snowspeeder from Empire Strikes Back, which he will debut to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Empire Strikes Back at the Emerald City Comic Con, I believe, next month. And, of course, we also have Jordy Lyons and Lewis Yu rounding out the moderating staff. And if it wasn't for these gents, I don't think the Post-Geek Singularity would be nearly as fun a place to hang out. I also want to thank many of the regulars who continue to write in letters and support the channel, such as Ian Samuels and, of course, Willow Yang. And, of course, some of our oldest members, Vesna over in Sarajevo, and Paula, and all of you who are here all the time that make this channel so much fun. So, as you all know, I will say, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And I'll do my Oscar Goldman. Steve, I used to love Oscar Goldman. No one could take his glasses off better. I mean, some people say David Caruso might, but Oscar Goldman was the man at taking off his glasses. But I will say that every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, on this Sunday afternoon, I bid you all farewell. And as always, have a better day.